Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into Blender to create a claymation style mouth animation, just like this one. Now, one request I've had many times is to put a tutorial together that can create a animatable mouth similar to the claymation mouths that you see on so many adverts and films. So I thought today's the day. I'm going to get this done. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to make a mouth using a mixture of techniques, including using curved circles, empties, wrapping it all up with an armature, and then doing some geometry node work to it, just to make it even more flexible. Let's start by creating a curve circle, like this one here. Now, before we do anything, let's just change the scale of this curved circle. I'm going to go for 0.1, which is 10 centimeters. Which I think is quite a reasonable size for a mouth. And then I think what I'll do is I'm going to add a number of empties around the edge of this circle, like this. Tabbing into Edit, selecting a point, Shift-S, cursor to selected. Coming out of that, I then just need to go to Shift-A, empty, plane axis. Now while I'm at it, I think I'll reduce the size of this empty to something like 0.05 so that it's nice and small. And rather than just creating the same for all of them, I think what I'll do is I'll select the circle, Shift-S, cursor to the center there, to the selected, change my transform pivot point to 3D cursor, and then select the empty, duplicate it with Shift-D, and then RZ90, and repeat again. Shift-D, click, RZ90, and once more. So there are the empties, and now I need to link them all up. Start by selecting an empty, then holding down Shift and selecting the circle. Tab into Edit mode, making sure this point is selected, hold down Control and hit H, and choose Hook to Selected Object. Now, if I was to just come out of Edit and go over to this empty and hit G and move it around, you can see that it moves pretty well. Let's go through the others. Hold down Shift, click, tab into Edit, choose the point, Control H, hook to selected. So that's all of them done. Let's just check just to make sure that this is as it should be. It's always worth doing that at this point, because sometimes it just doesn't work and you have to go over it again. But that looks pretty good. Let's have a top-down view with hitting 7 on the numerical pad. Yeah. That looks excellent. Now, if you don't have time to follow this tutorial, I'm going to leave a link in the description to my Gumroad page where you can buy this model for a very small amount. Now we're going to move on to the geometry nodes. I'm going to select the circle. And by the way, I may as well rename this now to mouth in the outliner. Under geometry node with the circle selected, let's click on new and give it a name. How about mouth controller or something to that effect? So let's start by creating the lips for the mouth. And I think what we're going to need to do first of all is Shift-A and add in a curve to mesh. Nothing happening yet, don't worry. Let's add a profile now in the form of a curved circle. If I drop that down here and then connect those two there, something strange has happened. It's turned into a very large ball. That's because the radius is currently extreme. So if I bring that down to something like, let's try 0.02. That's actually not bad. So it's interesting now, if we go to the empties and choose them, you can see that the shape is conforming very nicely. Via geometry nodes, it's created a very good profile around the edge of our curve. And the only thing that's lacking at the moment is the back of the mouth. If I was to put this on any surface, you'll be able to see the surface beneath. And I don't really want that. I want that to be, perhaps if you were to put this on a very pale face, you want to see a very dark background to this mouth, interior, if you like. So let's have a look at that next. Like what you see so far? If you do, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content like this. Doing so helps me and the channel so that I can produce even more content like this. Many thanks. Click back on the shape. If I just move these further apart, and this is going to be quite tricky, and I don't really want this tutorial to be too crammed with information. So for the interior now, I'm going to come over to the group input. I'm going to click on here and drag out and type in set spline cyclet and add this node here. Clicking on cyclet. Next, I'm going to add a trim curve node. Leaving that as it is, I'm going to add a curve to mesh. Leaving that as it is, I'm going to go for a domain size. Let's go back to curve to mesh and drag down and create a sample index. I'll just move these further apart just to keep things tidy. From the value, I'm going to go for a position node, and from the index, an index node. Going back over to domain size, point count becomes a mesh circle. Set the fill type to n-gon with a radius of 0.1. And from mesh to set position, we need to connect the value here to position and keep these all on 0. Now we're going to extrude the mesh. We'll put the offset on something small like 0.03. And then finally, we're going to move this group output over here, and we're going to add in a join geometry. Drop it here. And then join the mesh here to the geometry. And also we need to change the float on sample index to vector. And all of a sudden, as if by magic, we can see that our lips now have a mouth behind it. Think of it as a container. So within this, we're going to put tongue and teeth. And if I start messing around with the empties, you can see that the whole thing moves in unison. If I go to face orientation, you can see that the interior of the mouth, which is effectively an inside of an extrude, the normals need flipping. So that's actually pretty easy to do. I just need to call up a flip faces, and perhaps I can drop that here. And there we go. That's looking pretty good now. Switch face orientation back off. And now we can add a material. Let's start with the lips. So down here where the lips are, I add a set material and drop that here. I think also I'll duplicate that and drop that here. So there's one for the lips and one for the interior. At the moment, I don't have any materials. So let's quickly create a couple of materials for the time being. So if I click on the material tab and click on new and type in, how about lips? That sounds about right. Base color. Let's put something fairly lip colored. Something like that. Roughness, bring that down a little. I always add a pinch of subsurface. It just gives it that sort of plastic, rubber, or skin look in this particular case. 0.1 normally suffices. I think that will do for the lips. I'll also create another. I'll call this one interior, or something to that effect. If you're working on a larger project, I think it's worth giving it a longer name like mouth interior. Click on the base color, and I'm going to go for maybe like an extremely dark red, almost black for the interior. Roughness, I'll leave that as it is. I think I'll leave all of those as they are. That's good. And then I just need to come over to the set material here and choose interior for the interior and lips for the lips. Let's start tidying up our geometry nodes now. If I select all three of those and just press Ctrl J to create a frame and come over to here, if you can't see this, just press N on your keyboard and change the node tab here, change the label to lips, and I'll do the same up here. Select those ones, Ctrl J, and the label interior. So now we have the mouth built. We need to add in a couple of things such as teeth and tongue. I think we've done with the geometry nodes for the time being, so I'll just reduce it down. In fact, I might even put it back to a timeline for later when we start playing around with the animation side of things. So we'll start off by adding teeth in, clicking on the shape and pressing Shift S and cursor to selected so that your cursor is in the center of your object. How about we add some teeth by pressing Shift A and choosing Mesh and Plane. I'm going to tab into edit mode with this plane and press S to shrink it right down like this, perhaps to the width of the mouth. And then I'll SY to reduce the depth or the height of the teeth. So this is going to be the base for our teeth. As we're in edit mode, if I just press Ctrl R and click and then right click, I've just put a loop cut in there. Let me just increase that by going down here. If you can't see this, you need to expand it and increase this to something like 5 or 7 or 9, depending on how many teeth you want. Always go for an odd number. Otherwise, if you go for an even number like 6, I don't think anyone has a tooth in the middle. And then let's go to the face select mode up here. Select all of your faces using whichever method you fancy. Next, we're going to detach all of these faces from each other. So press Alt M and then choose Face by Edges. And now if I just select individual faces, you can see they're all detached from one another. Next, we're going to slightly tweak the width of the bottom of the tooth. I've selected, using the edge select, I've selected each of the bottom edges of the teeth. If I change my pivot point to individual origins and then S, slightly bring it in, you can see there I can sharpen those teeth up a little, but don't overdo it. Just do it be very, very subtle with it. Maybe something along those lines, almost to the point where you can't even see it. Tab out of edit mode, go to your modifier tab, add modifier, and let's add in a solidify modifier like that. Let's see, making that a little higher, maybe 0.02 or something to that effect. I'm going to add another modifier now. This one is going to be a subdivision surface modifier. I'm going to add a little form to our teeth. I need to boost this up a little. I'd say maybe 3 or something to that effect. Right click, shade smooth, tab into edit mode. I would add a number of edge loops on each of these teeth. It's good to just have this a little variable as well. Here we go, just so you can see what I'm doing. And while I'm at it, if I just select a number of these, making sure, maybe I'll go to median point, grab Y and just bring those up slightly, and maybe do the same with these, somewhere in between. So there is just a little curve to the teeth. Perhaps I'll just drag this into position anyway. So if I was to put that there, maybe a little higher, I think that will do. Maybe decrease the scale a little. Because I've been messing around with the scale outside of edit mode, I will need to press Ctrl A and rotate and scale just to fix all these scale points back to 1. Let's leave them where they are. The pivot point's in the center there. If it's not, just click on the lips, Shift S, cursor to selected, duplicate these, Shift D, click, and then making sure that your transform pivot point is set to 3D cursor, press R, Z, 180. So now we have the bottom set also. Now we are going to be running into a pretty big problem as we work through this project. Of course, if the mouth is partially closed, these teeth may start to poke out on the side of the lips. Let me show you what I mean. If I grab this and put this over here to create a very narrow mouth, can you see the teeth there are sticking through? So what I often do is I'll create 2 sets of teeth for most scenarios. So this is perhaps the wider set. Maybe I should give these names first. I could call this teeth upper wide. And the next one down here shall call lower wide. And if I duplicate these now, maybe one thing I should do is hit the / or the question mark on your keyboard just to isolate these two so you can see what you're doing. Tab into edit mode. I'll go to the face select here and just select these here. I'm being quite clumsy with my selection because if I press Ctrl L, that will select any remaining faces attached to those teeth. Hit X, press faces, it will delete those additional teeth. So now these, I'm going to call these narrow and narrow. Press / or question mark just to come out of that isolation mode. So we have 2 sets of teeth in the same position, the wide and the narrow. And when we start to add armature to this model, it's going to become more apparent how we can bring those in and out of the scene. So let's do that right now. Let's add an armature to our model. We have the cursor in place, Shift A, armature, single bone. Way too big, that's okay. Tab into edit mode, select the top there, choose the move tool. Make sure, of course, you move back to the median point for your transform pivot point, and then click and drag and pull down. So you have a smaller bone like that. This is going to be our control bone. This is going to be like the base, if you like, which all of the other ones are attached to, the parent. I'll just sink that somewhere below. Next, I'm going to duplicate it, grab Z, and this is going to be one of our mouth controllers, one of the lip controllers. Select the top, bring it down because you want it fairly small. And if I actually select the bone itself, like that, I'm going to grab that to here. Then I'm going to duplicate it, Shift D, and Shift D. Now we have the basics of our armature. Let's start linking things up a little. So if I click on one of these empties here and press Shift S, cursor to selected, and then select my armature, tab into edit mode. With this bone selected, Shift S, selection to cursor, and the bone jumps to that position. I'm going to repeat this for each of these empties. Tabbing out of edit mode, choose the empty, Shift S, cursor to selected, select the armature, tab into edit mode, select the bone, Shift S, selection to cursor. So now these are all positioned as they should be. Perfect. Let's now parent each of these bones to the empty that it is currently assigned to. Now, the way to do that is making sure that you have your armature selected. Go over to pose mode with a bone selected, so at the moment it's not doing anything, look for the corresponding empty. In this case, I believe it's going to be south. This is currently upside down. There we go. If it wasn't, I could just click on them all and find out which one. So selecting the bone and having the empty selected in the outliner, Control P and set parent to bone. Now if I move this bone, the empty will move with it. And of course, the empty is hooked onto the circle, which makes up for the shape of the mouth. Clicking on another. I think this one's going to be east. Yes, it is. Control P, bone, and then let's have a look. Now we've got west. See, as I'm doing these, they're disappearing anyway. They're going into the armature. There they are. So we're on west now. Let's click on the west bone, P, bone. And then let's go for north. Click on the north bone, Control P, bone. So all of these should now be connected. Let's come out of pose mode and go back to object mode, selecting the armature. Let's tab into edit. At the moment, these 4 bones controlling the shape of the mouth are not connected to the parent. So what we will need to do is select each of these bones and then lastly select the parent and Control P, keep offset, and that will make that bone the parent. So if I went into pose mode and grabbed this and moved it, you can see the whole set moves. I can also rotate it. I can even scale it. It's all connected. Just makes it far more portable and flexible for various things. Now let's add the teeth to the armature. Let's come out of pose mode to object mode, making sure our armature is selected, tab into edit mode, select one of the existing bones around the edge of the mouth, duplicate it, and drag it in like that. Maybe I'll pull this down a little, just so it's in the mouth a little more. And then top overview, I think I'll put that here like that. And I'll duplicate this and put that there. I'll select these 2, duplicate them, and drag them over like that. You don't have to be too precise. So each one of these is going to control the position of the sets of teeth. I've got the bone which will control the position of the lower narrow and the one for the lower wide. And then I've got the upper narrow and the upper wide. So to link those, tab out of edit mode, go into pose mode, pretty much the same way as we did with the empties. We select a bone. So this will be my lower narrow. So if I select that in the outliner, clicking on the bone, Control P, bone. Let's just put that to the test. Yep, that's working. Again, let's have a look at the next bone. This one's going to be the lower wide. So select the lower wide from the outliner, click on the bone, Control P, bone, and repeat with the upper set. So teeth upper narrow, this one, Control P, bone, teeth upper wide, this one, Control P, bone. So now all of these are connected. Let's come out of pose mode into object mode. One thing's missing with this mouth, and that is a tongue. So selecting the lips, Control S, cursor to selected, just to get the cursor nice and central. Next, Shift A, mesh, and cube. If I tab into edit mode, just press A just to select all and shrink that right down to something like that. Maybe SY just to flatten it a little there. And maybe using the face selector mode, shrink that down a little further. Tabbing out of edit mode, let's add in a subdivision surface modifier in the modifiers tab. As with the teeth, boost that up a little bit. Right click, shade smooth, And now that I've done that, I can see the tongue is far too small. That's okay. Tab into edit mode, scale it up a little, tab out of edit mode. Maybe it's a little too tall, actually. So I could always click on the top there, grab Z, and just pull that down to something like that. This tongue, of course, just like with any other element in the mouth, needs to have an armature element. So if I click on the armature, tab into edit mode, choose one of the bones, I think I'll choose this one this time, duplicate, drag it into position. I think I might scale this bone up, bring it down a little. That will do for the tongue. So now we have that complete. Let's jump into pose mode. I'm going to select the tongue, which I haven't even labeled, silly me, from the outliner, and then select the bone that's going to correspond to it. Control P, bone. Because I've realized now I've got a few things which need to be updated. First of all, there's the teeth, and then there is the tongue. None of these have color. So if I select a pair of the teeth and go to the Materials tab, click on New, if I type in teeth as my material, and I think the color needs to be very slightly off-white but bright, and then add a little bit of subsurface just to give it that plastic look. If I just expand the armature here, so that's the one which I've just done, hold down the Control key, select all of the others, and then finally go over to the final set, the one with the color. And then click on the drop down, copy material to selected. Let's do the tongue. New, tongue, give it a color. Maybe decrease the roughness a little. Add a bit of subsurface. Do you know, I'm not happy about the teeth. I think I need to go back to the teeth and decrease the roughness of them also. Should we animate it? Let's go for it. Now, the single best way of animating with a mouth like this is to create a series of poses, going through the various vowel sounds and what have you, and then call upon them later. The method I'm going to use now is calling on the asset browser, coming up with various configurations of mouth movements, and then saving them as poses. Let's try that right now. So with the asset browser open, first of all, you need to change from all to current file. In pose mode, make your configuration. So if I was just to look here, maybe I could make the mouth just a little narrow, something like that. I could perhaps bring the tongue down a little. Also, I don't want all of the sets of teeth showing, so I will pull down, grab Z, the larger set, and then maybe reposition these ones a little. It's quite important at this point to be using your quick keys for scaling and moving things around. Rather than just dragging as you see them, you're better off doing things like pressing G, Y, dragging things on the Y-axis, or G, Z on the Z-axis, so on and so forth. Or you could always have a look at the top orthographic view, pressing 7 on your keyboard, and click and move things around accordingly as well. Just make sure there's no sort of overlaps like that. Once you've configured the mouth as you want it, press A to select all of the bones, go over to the asset library, click on asset and create pose asset. Now, if you can't see a thumb here, if you can't see a picture for your asset, it could be that you don't have a camera enabled. So make sure that you add in a camera to your scene and that it's pointing directly at your object. This is not very descriptive, so if I press N on my keyboard, N for November, and then give it a proper name, surprise, that's my first pose asset in place. Let me come up with another one. How about a smile? Grab Y. Grab Y. And then for the teeth, I'll need to hide these ones a little better. Could even rotate this slightly, put it up here, press A, go to the asset, drop down and click on Create Pose Asset. There's our other. Again, give it a name. I think I'll create one more. A, asset, drop down, create pose asset. Now, before we go any further, perhaps I should just mention there are going to be links in the description to various online resources where you can go on. You can have a look at some of these mouth shape cards for inspiration. So if you want to go through all of the various sounds that you'd be using when animating a mouth when someone's talking, I will put that in the description, along with a link to this model on Gumroad. So anyway, after a couple of hours, you've built up a whole library of these mouth expressions. Great. Okay, let's just go back to object mode. Let's see how this could work in real life. Because there we go. I've got a few of these. If I go back to pose mode, select all, and double click on each one of these, you can see that it will go through those various mouth positions. Let's apply this to an object, just so I can show you how this may work in real life. Maybe I will add in shall I add a cylinder in? No, I think I'll add a cube in. Now the mouth, if I just select the armature and rotate on the X and position that so that it's partially sinking into the model, but not so far that the black is hidden. That's better. I could always be clever with this and perhaps do a few tweaks just to hide that edge. Or if you prefer, you could always go back to the geometry node and tweak the depth of that extrude. So let me just do that now. Perhaps I was a little over the top with it. That's fine, because it's very easy to change. Just need to go down to the extrude mesh offset and put that on something a little less. Let's try 2. Yeah, that still works. That still looks good. And while I'm at it, do you know, I think I should add in a shade smooth as well, just to finish this off nicely. Put that there, just to ensure that there are no sharp edges. Perfect. And now I have a little more scope for moving this around. If I just push this back a little further. Yep, that will do. Again, just be creative with it. You can always bend the shape around the mouth a little just to hide any bits that are overlapping there. Maybe make the shape just bigger. Like that. Will certainly help. Perfect. Now linking the two together, select your armature, select the shape, Control P, object. A very simple way of linking these shapes together. There are far better ways, by the way. This is just a very quick way of getting it done. You know, I really feel like I need to add some eyes now. Should we go for it? Now for the animation. Selecting the armature, going to pose mode, dead easy, go to your timeline, click on record, choose a mouth position, move along a little, choose another, and then another. And you can just go on there and just cause your character to waffle around as much as it fancies. That'll do. Let's see how this looks now. I'll just hide everything. Oh yes. Not bad at all.